Imagine this. You're flying high above the clouds, feeling the thrill of skydiving, when suddenly your parachute gets snagged on the wheel of the plane. You're left suspended in midair, with a daunting drop below and little hope for survival. Just when it seems like all is lost, another plane appears on the horizon, racing against time to rescue you. In today's gripping story, we'll delve into the heart-stopping moment when one man faced the ultimate test of courage and resilience. Before we dive into this incredible tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Wreck Stories for more thrilling narratives like this one. Now, let's jump right into this extraordinary adventure. It began like any other May morning in California. The sky was blue, the sun hot. A slight breeze riffled the glistening waters of San Diego Bay. At the Naval Air Base on North Island, all was calm. At 9:45 a.m., Walter Osipov, a sandy-haired 23-year-old Marine second lieutenant from Akron, Ohio, boarded a DC-2 transport for a routine parachute jump. Lieutenant Bill Lowry, a 34-year-old Navy test pilot from New Orleans, was already putting his observation plane through its paces. And John McCants, a husky 41-year-old aviation chief machinist's mate from Jordan, Montana, was checking out the aircraft that he was scheduled to fly later. Before the sun was high in the noonday sky, these three men would be linked forever in one of history's most spectacular mid-air rescues. Osipov was a seasoned parachutist, a former collegiate wrestling and gymnastics star. He had joined the National Guard and then the Marines in 1938. He had already made more than 20 jumps by May 15, 1941. That morning, his DC-2 took off and headed for Kearny Mesa, where Osipov would supervise practice jumps by 12 of his men. 3 separate canvas cylinders containing ammunition and rifles were also to be parachuted overboard as part of the exercise. 9 of the men had already jumped when Osipov, standing a few inches from the plane's door, started to toss out the last cargo container. Somehow, the automatic release cord of his backpack parachute became looped over the cylinder, and his chute was suddenly ripped open. He tried to grab hold of the quickly billowing silk, but the next thing he knew, he had been jerked from the plane, sucked out with such force that the impact of his body ripped a 2.5-foot gash in the DC-2's aluminum fuselage. Instead of flowing free, Osipov's open parachute now wrapped itself around the plane's tail wheel. The chute's chest strap and one leg strap had broken. Only the second leg strap was still holding, and it had slipped down to Osipov's ankle. One by one, 24 of the 28 lines between his precariously attached harness and the parachute snapped. He was now hanging some 12 feet below and 15 feet behind the tail of the plane. 4 parachute shroud lines twisted around his left leg were all that kept him from being pitched to the earth. Dangling there upside down, Osipov had enough presence of mind to not try to release his emergency parachute. With the plane pulling him one way and the emergency chute pulling him another, he realized that he would be torn in half. Conscious all the while, he knew that he was hanging by one leg, spinning and bouncing, and he was aware that his ribs hurt. He did not know then that 2 ribs and 3 vertebrae had been fractured. Inside the plane, the DC-2 crew struggled to pull Osipov to safety, but they could not reach him. The aircraft was starting to run low on fuel, but an emergency landing with Osipov dragging behind would certainly smash him to death. And pilot Harold Johnson had no radio contact with the ground. To attract attention below, Johnson eased the transport down to 300 feet and started circling North Island. A few people at the base noticed the plane coming by every few minutes, but they assumed that it was towing some sort of target. Meanwhile, Bill Lowry had landed his plane and was walking toward his office when he glanced upward. He and John McCants, who was working nearby, saw at the same time the figure dangling from the plane. As the DC-2 circled once again, Lowry yelled to McCants, "There's a man hanging on that line. Do you suppose we can get him?" McCants answered grimly, "We can try." Lowry shouted to his mechanics to get his plane ready for takeoff. It was an SOC-1, a two-seat open cockpit observation plane less than 27 feet long, recalled Lowry afterward. I didn't even know how much fuel it had. Turning to McCants, he said, "Let's go." Lowry and McCants had never flown together before, but the two men seemed to take it for granted that they were going to attempt the impossible. There was only one decision to be made, Lowry later said quietly, and that was to go get him. How, we didn't know. We had no time to plan. Nor was there time to get through to their commanding officer and request permission for the flight. Lowry simply told the tower, "Give me a green light. I'm taking off." At the last moment, a Marine ran out to the plane with a hunting knife for cutting Osipov loose and dumped it in McCants' lap. As the SOC-1 roared aloft, all activity around San Diego seemed to stop. Civilians crowded rooftops, children stopped playing at recess, and the men of North Island strained their eyes upward. With murmured prayers and pounding hearts, the watchers agonized through every move in the impossible mission. Within minutes, Lowry and McCants were under the transport, flying at 300 feet. They made 5 approaches, but the air proved too bumpy to try for a rescue. Since radio communication between the two planes was impossible, Lowry hand-signaled Johnson to head out over the Pacific, where the air would be smoother, and they climbed to 3,000 feet. Johnson held his plane on a straight course and reduced speed to that of the smaller plane, 100 miles an hour. Lowry flew back and away from Osipov, but level with him. McCants, who was in the open seat in back of Lowry, saw that Osipov was hanging by 1 foot and that blood was dripping from his helmet. Lowry edged the plane closer with such precision that his maneuvers jibed with the swings of Osipov's inert body. His timing had to be exact so that Osipov did not smash into the SOC-1's propeller. Finally, Lowry slipped his upper left wing under Osipov's shroud lines, and McCants, standing upright in the rear cockpit, with the plane still going 100 miles an hour 3,000 feet above the sea, lunged for Osipov. He grabbed him at the waist, and Osipov flung his arms around McCants' shoulders in a death grip. McCants pulled Osipov into the plane, but since it was only a 2-seater, the next problem was where to put him. As Lowry eased the SOC-1 forward to get some slack in the chute lines, McCants managed to stretch Osipov's body across the top of the fuselage, with Osipov's head in his lap. Because McCants was using both hands to hold Osipov in a vise, there was no way for him to cut the cords that still attached Osipov to the DC-2. Lowry then nosed his plane inch by inch closer to the transport and, with incredible precision, used his propeller to cut the shroud lines. After hanging for 33 minutes between life and death, Osipov was finally free. Lowry had flown so close to the transport that he'd nicked a 12-inch gash in its tail. But now the parachute, abruptly detached along with the shroud lines, drifted downward and wrapped itself around Lowry's rudder. That meant that Lowry had to fly the SOC-1 without being able to control it properly, and with most of Osipov's body still on the outside. Yet 5 minutes later, Lowry somehow managed to touch down at North Island, and the little plane rolled to a stop. Osipov finally lost consciousness, but not before he heard sailors applauding the landing. Later on, after lunch, Lowry and McCants went back to their usual duties. 3 weeks later, both men were flown to Washington, D.C., where Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox awarded them the Distinguished Flying Cross for executing one of the most brilliant and daring rescues in naval history. Osipov spent the next 6 months in the hospital. The following January, completely recovered and newly promoted to first lieutenant, he went back to parachute jumping. The morning he was to make his first jump after the accident, he was cool and laconic, as usual. His friends, though, were nervous. One after another, they went up to reassure him. Each volunteered to jump first so he could follow. Osipov grinned and shook his head. "The hell with that," he said as he fastened his parachute. "I know damn well I'm going to make it." And he did. As we reflect on this harrowing tale of survival, it's a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of adventure. The Skydiver, who faced seemingly insurmountable odds, found hope in an unexpected rescue from another plane. This incredible story illustrates the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary lengths people will go to save one another. Whether it's a daring leap from a plane or a courageous act of heroism, these moments remind us that even in our most desperate times, there is always a glimmer of hope. If you enjoyed this thrilling rescue story, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible tales that showcase the unpredictability and adventure of life. What would you do in a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below.